Welcome back to Streaming Media East 2022 in Boston. I'm Tim Siglin. I realize actually I haven't said that on any of the previous interviews that we've done, but I'm Tim Siglin, contributing editor with Streaming Media and the founding executive director of the not-for-profit Help Me Stream Research Foundation. Today I've got with me Brett Sappington from Interpret. And tell me what Interpret is, because I'm not familiar.
Interpret is a global market research and insights firm based out of Los Angeles. I'm actually based out of the Dallas office.
Okay. And what's the primary industry that Interpret works with?
Interpret works in a number of areas. A couple of in particular is I lead the video entertainment research practice, but we also have expertise in gaming, in Internet of Things, and a couple of other areas.
So what have you seen that's changed in the last 3 years since, all of us were together at streaming events and from a market analysis standpoint?
Sure, well, the mantra of the industry is it's always changing. So over the past 2 years, COVID certainly made a lot of difference in terms of how things were consumed, but one of the things we're really looking at is how video entertainment is changing in terms of the consumer's overall portfolio of entertainment. So we're talking gaming and music and podcasts and reading and other areas like that. So it's been really interesting to see how that share has changed, because we always look at total number of hours, we look at streaming versus traditional, but until you kind of understand where it sits relative to everything else, it's hard to understand, is that share growing, is it shrinking, and as you look at the audience, what does that mean, and what do you do about it?
So we had Jessica from Roku, who I did an interview with earlier, who mentioned that, she had worked for a number of channels before. She now works for Roku, which is a platform, and that on the Roku channel, which is the one channel they have on there, that the percentage of cord cutters is well above 50% at this point, and the consumption of content appears to be well above 50% for sort of standard linear television versus live linear or VOD packaged or fast packaged. The keynote this morning that William Roberts did from NBCU said they're at about 37%. They're not quite to 50. They figure within the next 2 years they'll get to 50. What do you all see? Do you see that as a whole? Because those are just two small snapshots into the industry. But do you see as a whole that we're past that 50% mark for linear television versus streaming, or where do we fall in that?
Yeah, I see it in around the same spot in terms of about 50% or even more going with streaming today. What we found also that's interesting in that portfolio that I was talking about, average for consumers in the US, about 40%, video, television, and movies represents about 40% of entertainment consumption. And at the end of 2021, for the first time, fell below 40%, reaching 39%. And what's interesting about that is that's while video consumption has grown, at least marginally grown. So what that says is consumers are using more entertainment from other areas.
Well, and in fact, when we talked about the State of Streaming survey this morning, we talked about sort of large viewing or subscriber models seem to be falling away in favor of lower numbers of subscribers, so a fragmentation in the market potentially. What I hear you say is it's not just a fragmentation in the streaming portion of the market, it's a fragmentation in the way the media consumption is done across the board.
Right, and even perhaps more than that, you have the fragmentation from traditional to streaming services and the multitude of streaming services, though you have a number of big players coming up. But now we're also finding that there's even a further fragmentation in terms of types of content. So short form content, live streaming, YouTube, all of the others we're seeing, TikTok, exactly. So not only are we seeing this fragmentation in terms of service options, but in terms of consumer preference and what they're filling their time with.
Interesting.
So on average, we find that, for example, live streaming, consumers are averaging about 2 hours a week
Okay.
watching live stream content. And that's really across all ages. And that's a really different world.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Well, and it's interesting to think back to Vine and some of these others that were short form that didn't quite get off the ground or got off the ground and fell away. What was it? Periscope, I think, was another one. And yet now we have TikTok at an even shorter, length consumption model. Is the trend toward shorter and shorter, or is that just sort of a wave we're going through from media consumption?
Yeah, it's a good question. What we find is TV and movies still is number one.
Okay.
Even if it has shrunk relative to the overall consumption of consumers, it's still the top option.
Okay.
Consumers still, even the youngest, 13 to 24-year-olds, about a third of their consumption is TV and movies. But what we're finding is these other formats are really filling up a larger piece of
Got
time.
it. Okay.
So short form, for example, young consumers, about 5% of their overall consumption is around short form video, which is massive considering that about a third of their content is TV and movies.
It's TV and movies, yeah.
So it's a huge change, and it's not just an erosion of TV and movies. It's as you said earlier, it's a fragmentation of a different level or a different type.
So we'll end on a note of something you mentioned. You said reading in there. How has that fared through the pandemic?
Surprisingly, reading has stayed fairly consistent, both physical media and digital media.
Okay.
We do find a few interesting trends. For example, young consumers, we actually saw physical media reading increase slightly.
Okay.
And it was primarily graphic novels, comics, and those types of materials. So the materials are different, the sources are different, but no fears for the next generation. They're still reading.
Good. Well, that's actually a really positive thing to hear. So thank you very much for your time, Brett, and look forward to maybe talking to you in the next couple events as well, just to sort of see where some of those trends have gone.
Absolutely. Well, it's glad to be back at events again.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll be right back.